Hello, everyone. This story was found in an online forum and we adapted it into a full story for you today. If you have a story you'd like to share, the submission link is in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The cemetery grass was still wet from the morning rain when they lowered Eleanor into the ground. 38 years. That's what kept running through my head as the straps creaked and the casket sank. 38 years of coffee made the way she liked it, of her reading glasses left on every flat surface in the house, of her humming in the kitchen, even when she didn't realize she was doing it. 8 months ago, she had walked into the oncologist's office on her own 2 feet. Yesterday, I'd held her hand for the last time in a hospice room that smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers. Pancreatic cancer doesn't negotiate. I'm 62 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer before I retired, and I built the house we lived in with my own hands back in 1994. Every joist, every cabinet, every window frame designed around the woman they were now burying in front of me. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years. Every nail in that house knew her. My son Marcus stood beside me in a black suit that didn't quite fit him through the shoulders. He's 34, marketing manager at some firm downtown. The kind of job where the title sounds bigger than the paycheck. His wife Madison stood on his side in sunglasses too dark for an overcast morning, scrolling her phone whenever she thought no one was looking. Their 2 kids, Caleb and Sophie, fidgeted between them, too young to really understand that grandma wasn't coming back. I didn't cry at the gravesite. I've done all my crying in the 8th months before, sitting next to a hospital bed at 3 in the morning. By the time the priest finished speaking, I felt hollowed out, like a tree that's still standing but knows the inside is gone. We went back to the house for the reception. Eleanor's sister had organized it: sandwiches, coffee, a tray of cookies nobody touched. People I half recognized from 40 years of life kept hugging me and saying things I couldn't process. I nodded. I shook hands. I stood near the window where Eleanor used to keep her African violets and let the afternoon move past me. That's when Marcus pulled me aside. He waited until the kitchen was empty, until Madison had taken her mom into the living room, until I was reaching for a glass of water I didn't really want. He put his hand on my shoulder the way you'd touch something fragile. "Dad," he said quietly, "listen, we've been talking about it. Madison and me, with everything that's happened, we think it's best if you move into the guest room by Sunday." I set the glass down on the counter. I didn't look at him. "The kids need the bigger rooms," he went on, his voice still in that gentle register, like he was doing me a favor. "And Madison wants the master. She's already got some ideas for it. It'll be easier for everyone, Dad. You shouldn't be rattling around in that big bedroom alone right now." I turned my head and looked at him. Really looked at him. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike on the driveway out front, the young man I'd co-signed 2 car loans for, the grown adult standing in my kitchen on the day I buried his mom, telling me which room I'd be sleeping in by the weekend. I nodded, just once, slow. He took it for grief, for acceptance. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "I'm glad you understand, Dad," and walked back out the living room. The reception emptied out by 6. Eleanor's sister hugged me at the door and made me promise to call if I need anything. Marcus and Madison left with the kids around 7. Madison giving the master bedroom doorway one long look on her way out. The house went quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. I sat down at the kitchen table. The funeral flowers were still in their cellophane on the counter. I could smell the lilies from across the room. Then I took out my phone. 2 years ago, I'd installed a security system through the house. Cameras in the entryway, the living room, the upstairs hallway, and at Eleanor's insistence after a break-in down the street, inside the master bedroom, pointed at the window. I'd set the whole thing up, myself, on my own, with my own password. Marcus knew it existed when I installed it. I doubt he'd thought about it once since. I opened the app and scrolled back to that afternoon. There she was, Madison, 3:27 in the afternoon, while I was downstairs accepting condolences. She was in our bedroom with a yellow tape measure stretched across the foot of the bed. She measured the closet. She opened Eleanor's jewelry drawer, picked up a pearl necklace, held it up to her own throat in the mirror, and put it back. Then she FaceTimed someone. I couldn't hear the audio clearly, but I caught fragments. The light in here is unreal. We're gutting it. The carpet's going first. I scrolled back further. A month ago, while Eleanor was in chemo, Madison going through that same jewelry drawer alone. 6 months ago, Marcus at my desk in the study, photographing the deed paperwork in his phone, page by page. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time after that. The lilies kept smelling sweet and wrong. The clock above the stove ticked. Eventually, I got up, found a yellow legal pad in a drawer where Eleanor kept the takeout menus, and sat back down. I clicked my pen. At the top of the page, in careful block letters, I wrote one word: list. And then I started writing. I slept maybe 3 hours that first night, and when I woke up, I made a decision before my feet even hit the floor. I was going to be exactly what they thought it was: the broken old man, the grieving husband who couldn't tie his own shoes, the empty chair at the head of the table. If Marcus and Madison wanted to believe I was a soft target, I was going to let them keep believing it for a few more days, because I needed those days. Marcus called me at 9 the next morning. His voice had that careful, hospice volunteer tone. "How are you holding up, Dad? Did you sleep? Madison and I were thinking we'd come by this afternoon, maybe help you start sorting through some of Mom's things." I told him that was thoughtful. I told him I appreciated it. I told him I was a little tired, but he was welcome anytime. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, watching my coffee go cold. They showed up at 2. Madison brought paint swatches. She didn't even pretend. That's the part I keep coming back to. She walked in with a fan deck of grays and creams and laid it out on the dining room table like she was hosting an open house. She brought a contractor with her too, a man named Rick in a polo shirt who shook my hand without quite meeting my eye. Then immediately started taking measurements in the upstairs hallway. Her mom arrived 20 minutes later with a casserole and opinions about the kitchen backsplash. I stayed in my recliner. I let my voice go quiet. When Madison asked me what I thought about taupe versus warm white for the new master, I told her I trusted her judgment. She beamed at me like I was a good dog. Marcus waited until Madison was upstairs with Rick before he sat down across from me with a manila folder. "Dad, I hate to bring this up so soon," he said, opening the folder, "but there's some estate cleanup we should get ahead of. Just routine stuff. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, things Mom would have wanted handled properly." He slid a stack of papers across the coffee table. The top page was titled Durable Power of Attorney. His name was already typed into the agent line. I picked up the stack. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I smiled at him, a little watery, a little vague, and said, "Let me look it over, son. My eyes aren't what they were." "Of course, Dad, no rush." There was a rush. He tried to bring it up twice before they left. I called Henry Doyle the next morning. Henry and I went to college together back when we both still had hair, and he'd been my attorney for 30 years. I asked if he had time to see me that afternoon. He cleared his calendar. In Henry's office, I laid it out plain. The funeral, the bedroom, the paint swatches, Madison's mom choosing a backsplash in a house that wasn't hers, the power of attorney with my son's name pre-filled. Henry listened with his hands folded on his desk and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he pulled my file. We went through everything together. The house, fully in my name, no liens, no joint ownership. 2 rental properties downtown I'd bought in the early 2000s, both clean. The investment accounts Eleanor and I had built up over the decades, all in my name as the surviving spouse. Eleanor's small inheritance from her father, about $90,000, had gone into a separate trust years ago, structured so that Marcus couldn't touch the principal until he turned 40, and only then under specific conditions. Eleanor had insisted on that structure herself. She'd seen something in our son before I had the courage to. "You're in a strong position," Henry said. "Don't sign anything they put in front of you. Don't even pretend to consider it, and start documenting." I was already documenting. Back home that night, I opened the security app again and started scrolling. I went back 6 months, then a year, then further. The footage was on a rolling buffer, but the cloud backup I'd set up had kept the flag events. What I found made me sit very still. Madison in our bedroom, going through Eleanor's jewelry drawer the afternoon Eleanor was in chemo last March. She'd taken a bracelet that day. I remembered Eleanor mentioning weeks later that she couldn't find it and assumed she'd misplaced it during one of the hospital stays. Marcus, in my study, photographing the deed paperwork on my desk last June while I was at a doctor's appointment with his mom. And then the one that stopped my breath, 3 weeks before Eleanor died, when she was already too weak to come downstairs, Madison sitting on the edge of our living room couch on the phone with her mom. The audio wasn't perfect, but I could make out enough. He won't last a year alone. The house is basically ours already. Marcus says his dad checks out around 6 every night, just stares at the TV. We can move in by spring. A different clip, a different day. Marcus on our back patio with Madison, both of them smoking, which I didn't even know my son did. Just be patient. He's checked out. We push harder next week. I backed up every clip 3 different ways. External hard drive in the safe, encrypted cloud account Henry helped me set up, a USB drive I mailed to my brother in Tucson with a note asking him to hold it without opening it. Then I called a real estate agent named Diane who'd handled my rental properties. I called a locksmith and scheduled a Saturday appointment. I called a non-emergency police line and asked him to note, on the record, that I was anticipating a domestic dispute on Sunday morning at my address. By Friday night, the legal pad was full. Sunday was 3 days away. I made another pot of coffee, and I waited. Saturday morning, the locksmith came at 8. His name was Dave, and he didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. He rekeyed every exterior door, the door from the garage into the kitchen, and the deadbolt I'd had him install on the master bedroom. New keys, new combinations on the keypad locks, the whole system reset. He was gone by 10:30. I paid him cash and tipped him an extra $50. Then I made the bed. Eleanor's side, the way she liked it. Corners tucked, 2 pillows stacked. The quilt her mom had made folded at the foot. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I needed her in the room with me for what was coming. I spent the rest of Saturday at the kitchen table organizing the packet. Henry had sent over a courier with everything I'd asked for, the deed, certified copy, updated and signed and witnessed 2 days ago, sealed with Henry's notary stamp. Stills from the security footage, printed on good paper, time-stamped, captioned in my own handwriting. The audio transcript from Madison on the couch, certified by the third-party service Henry recommended. I put everything in a black folder and set it on the kitchen counter, where the funeral lilies had been. I slept better Saturday night than I had since the diagnosis. Sunday morning, I got up at 6, made coffee, showered, put on a pressed shirt and my good slacks, not a suit. I didn't need a suit for this. I wanted to look like a man who had had breakfast and read the paper, not a man preparing for a fight. They pulled up at 9:45. I watched them on the front camera from my phone. Marcus drove. Madison was in the passenger seat already on the phone with someone. Behind him came a U-Haul 20-foot, driven by one of Madison's friends. 2 more of her friends in a Subaru behind that. The kids weren't with them. That part surprised me. They'd left Caleb and Sophie somewhere. Madison's mom, probably. They hadn't even brought the grandchildren as cover. I went and stood in the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of coffee, waited. Madison came in first through the front door, calling out, "We're here, Dad, hi," and stopped in the foyer when she didn't see boxes. I heard her go up the stairs, fast, heels on the hardwood. I heard her try the master bedroom door, try it again, then a third time, harder, the handle rattling. "Marcus!" Her voice came down the stairs sharp. "Marcus, the door is locked." He came in then, 2 of her friends behind him carrying empty wardrobe boxes from the truck. He looked at me standing in the kitchen with my coffee. His face did a small, confused thing. "Dad? What's going on?" "Madison says the bedroom's locked." "It is," I said. Madison came back down the stairs at speed. Her sunglasses were pushed up into her hair, and her face was already flushed. Why is the master locked, Marcus? Why is it locked? We talked about this. You talked about it, I said. The friends in the foyer set their boxes down very slowly. Marcus stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind him, leaving Madison and her crew in the hall. He used his calm voice, his let's be reasonable voice, the same voice I'd heard him use on customer service representatives. Dad, come on. We agreed on Sunday. Madison's been planning all week. The contractor's coming Tuesday. We have a whole timeline here. What is this? We didn't agree to anything, Marcus. I took a sip of my coffee. You told me. There's a difference. Dad, at your mom's funeral, while people were still in the house eating sandwiches, you pulled me aside and told me which room I'd be sleeping in by Sunday. I set the cup down. I want you to hear yourself say that out loud. He didn't. His mouth opened and then closed. Madison pushed the door open. This is unbelievable, she said. Her voice was already at the volume she used for her social media videos, the performative one. This is, Dad, the family deserves this house. We have children. You're alone in this huge place. It's selfish. It's actually selfish. You can't just... Madison. Marcus put his hand on her arm. She shook it off. No, Marcus, I'm done being polite. We've been patient. We've been so patient with him. Patient, I said. Something in my voice stopped her. I picked up the black folder from the counter and set it on the kitchen table between us. I opened it slowly, slid the deed across first, then the will, then the photographs. The first photograph was Madison in my bedroom with a tape measure, timestamped 3:27 p.m., the day of the funeral. Madison made a sound I won't try to describe. The second photograph was her with Eleanor's pearl necklace held to her throat in the mirror. The third was her FaceTiming about the carpet. The fourth was a different day entirely. Her hand in Eleanor's jewelry drawer last March. The fifth was Marcus at my desk photographing the deed. The sixth was a printed transcript. He won't last a year alone. The house is basically ours already. Marcus picked it up. His hand was shaking. Dad, please. You have until 6 o'clock tonight, I said, to get the U-Haul off my property and to drive away. If you're still here at 6:01, the officer I've already spoken with this week will be here. The locks are changed. The will is filed. The cameras are still recording right now. Madison was crying. The performative kind first, then the real kind underneath when she realized no one was watching her cry but me. I picked up my coffee. Take your friends with you. They were gone by 4:30. Madison didn't say another word to me. She walked out of the kitchen, collected her friends from the foyer, and got in the passenger seat of a U-Haul without looking back. Marcus stood in a doorway for a long moment with a black folder still in his hand. Then he set it down on the entry table, very carefully, like it was something breakable, and followed her out. I watched the truck pull away from the driveway camera. I sat down at the kitchen table and finished my coffee. It had gone cold an hour ago. Tuesday afternoon, Marcus came back alone. I saw him on the front camera before the doorbell rang. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn to the funeral, which I noted, and he was holding a bouquet of white roses, which I also noted. I let him stand on the porch for a full minute before I opened the door. He'd been crying, or he made himself look like he had. Dad, can I come in, please? I stepped aside. He sat on a couch where his mom used to do the crossword. He set the roses on the coffee table. He started talking before I'd even sat down, about how he hadn't slept, about how he'd been a fool, about how Madison had been pushing him for months and he'd lost himself in it, about how grief was clouding his judgment, about how he loved me, about how he was so sorry. Dad, so sorry, you have to believe me. None of this was supposed to happen the way it happened. I let him talk for about 6 minutes, then I took out my phone. I queued the audio clip already. I tapped play. Just be patient. He's checked out. We push harder next week. His own voice. His own laugh underneath it. He went very still on the couch. Dad, that's out of context. That wasn't... What context, Marcus? Madison was... We were talking about something else. You don't understand. I understand fine. He tried a few more angles. He tried blaming Madison entirely. He tried blaming the stress of the cancer. He tried blaming his job, which I learned later he'd already been on a final warning at. When none of those worked, he switched, the way I knew he would eventually, to the version of him I'd been waiting for. You can't do this to me, Dad. I'm your son. I'm your only child. Mom would be horrified. You know she would. She'd want us to be a family. She'd want... Don't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Don't put words in your mom's mouth in this house. Not after what she watched the two of you do for the last year of her life. What does that mean? It means she knew, Marcus. She knew about the bracelet. She told me 3 days before she died that she didn't want Madison at the bedside. She told me she was worried about you. She made me promise to protect what we'd built. My voice did something that I hadn't expected. It cracked, just once, and I let it. I am keeping that promise. He stared at me. There's something else you should know, I said. Henry filed the updated will yesterday. The house, the rentals, the investment accounts, they're going into a charitable foundation in your mom's name. Cancer research, hospice support. There's a separate trust for Caleb and Sophie that they can access at 25 for education and a first home. Henry administers it, not you, not Madison, not anyone you can pressure. He stood up. You can't do that. I already did. I'll fight it. I'll have you declared incompetent. You'll lose, Marcus. Henry's been preparing for that since Tuesday. We have my doctor's evaluations. We have witnesses. We have 8 years of tax returns I filed myself. We have everything. And we have the footage, which you should think about very carefully before you take this anywhere near a courtroom. He left without picking up the roses. The smear campaign started the next day. Madison's first video had 140,000 views before I knew it existed. She was crying in good lighting. Her grieving father-in-law had become unstable since her mother-in-law's death. He was being manipulated, possibly by an attorney taking advantage of him. He'd lock his own grandchildren out of the only home they'd ever known. She just wanted the family to heal. Henry had a cease and desist drafted within 4 hours. We sent it certified. But something else happened that I didn't expect. Madison's own followers started doing math. The funeral had been on a Saturday. Her video about weeks of family conflict was posted 9 days later. Someone in the comments pulled up an old post of hers from a month before Eleanor died. Madison in our master bedroom pretending to be at a hotel, captioned about needing a getaway. Someone else found a FaceTime clip she'd posted to her close friend's story the day of the funeral, before she'd thought to delete it, the one about the light being unreal. The comment section turned on her in about 36 hours. Marcus's company saw the videos. He was let go on a Friday. The official reason being unrelated performance issues. The unofficial reason being that his employer didn't want their name anywhere near a viral funeral scandal. Madison's mom showed up at my door on a Sunday morning in a fur coat she couldn't possibly afford. She demanded I fix this. She told me I was destroying her daughter's life. She told me I owed her family. I closed the door without speaking. The only part was that I didn't see Caleb and Sophie for 4 months. Madison made sure of that. I sent birthday cards that came back unopened. I kept their drawings on the refrigerator anyway. I waited. 6 months after the funeral, I sold the house. I hadn't planned to. I thought I'd lived out the rest of my days in those rooms, the way Eleanor and I had always pictured it. But every morning I woke up and looked at her side of the bed, and then at the doorway where Madison stood with her tape measure, and I realized the house had become two things at once. It was there I'd loved my wife for 38 years, and it was where my son had told me which room to sleep in while her body was still warm in the ground. I couldn't keep both of those things in the same walls. Diane, the realtor, sold it in 9 days over asking. I signed the papers in Henry's office on a Tuesday morning and sat in my truck in the parking lot afterward for almost an hour, not crying, just sitting. Most of the proceeds went into the foundation. Eleanor's name on the letterhead, a board of 3 people, Henry, an old friend of Eleanor's from her teaching days, and a hospice administrator who'd been kind to us at the end. They were already funding 2 scholarships and a respite program for caregivers by the time the leaves turned. I kept enough to buy a small place on the coast. It was a town Eleanor had pointed at on a map once, 20 years ago, and said, someday. 2 bedrooms, a porch that faced east, a garage that could turn into a workshop. The first thing I did when I moved in was set up the table saw I hadn't touched since Marcus was in middle school. I made a cutting board the first weekend. It came out crooked. I made another one. By the 3rd month, I was making rocking chairs. There's something about working with your hands when your heart is broken. The wood doesn't lie to you. You either cut the joint right or you cut it wrong, and the wood tells you which one immediately. The letter came in March, 3 pages, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper, which I noticed and which I think he'd done on purpose. Marcus's handwriting had always been bad. This was worse, like he'd been writing fast so he wouldn't lose his nerve. He didn't ask for anything. That was the first thing I checked for, and it wasn't there. No mention of the foundation, no mention of money at all. He wrote about being 8 years old and helping me lay the tile in the upstairs bathroom. He wrote about the night his mom had stayed up with him through a fever when he was 11. He wrote about realizing 2 months into the separation that Madison had been the architect of almost everything, but that he had been the one who'd pulled me aside in the kitchen on the day of the funeral, and that no one had made him do that, and he didn't know how to live without having done it. The marriage was over. Madison had filed in January. The divorce would be final by summer. He was renting a 1-bedroom apartment near his old neighborhood and working at a hardware store while he tried to figure out what came next. He didn't ask to see me. He just said the door was open on his end if I ever wanted to use it. I read the letter twice, and then I put it in the drawer where I kept Eleanor's last cards to me. I waited a week, then I wrote back. 1 paragraph. I told him forgiveness was possible, but reconciliation was earned. I told him he could come see me, alone, with no agenda and no asks, when he was ready to listen and not explain. I told him I would not be discussing the past on that visit or any visit. I told him to bring the children if Madison would allow it. I signed it, Dad. He came in May. He drove up alone on a Saturday morning in a car I didn't recognize. Older, dented, his, and stood in my porch with his hands in his pockets like a kid waiting outside the principal's office. He'd lost weight. He'd let his beard grow, and there was more gray in it than I'd expected. He didn't try to hug me. He just said, "Hi, Dad." I said, "Come in, the coffee's on." We sat on the porch. We didn't talk about Madison. We didn't talk about the will. We didn't talk about the house or the funeral or the bedroom or the cameras. He asked about the workshop. I showed him the rocking chairs. He asked if I'd teach him how to cut a dovetail. I said maybe next visit. He brought Caleb and Sophie up the following month. Sophie didn't remember me at first. She was only 4, and 4 months is a long time at 4. But Caleb did. Caleb walked straight up to me on the porch and put his arms around my waist and didn't let go for a full minute. I cried then, quietly into the top of his head, where his hair smelled like the same shampoo Eleanor used to buy for him. We spent the weekend on the beach. I taught Caleb how to skip a flat stone. I let Sophie put shells in a bucket until the bucket was too heavy for her to carry. Marcus stayed back from us most of the time, watching, the way a man watches something he almost lost. Sunday evening after they'd gone, I sat on the porch with Eleanor's photograph on the table, beside me in a glass of the bourbon she bought me for our last anniversary. The grandchildren had drawn me pictures. Caleb's was a house with a sun over it. Sophie's was a circle she insisted was a whale. I taped them to the refrigerator. Grief made me quiet, but quiet was never the same thing as weak. Eleanor had known that. I had finally remembered it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.